CFC value plays. I'm Jason Gilbo, JGilbo11. Taking a look at some value on DraftKings and FanDuel for tonight's NBA slate. Finally, we got 3 games last night, including a blowout. Spurs killed the Warriors in that late game. Overall, though, I mean, here we go, 10 games. We're jumping right into it. And looking at Vegas so far to start, I mean, all but 3 games are with a 200 total and or higher. So we're looking at a pretty juicy slate in terms of matchups. A lot of high-paced teams going. And you know, overall, early on here in the season, we're taking a look at some guys on new teams, you know, kind of soaking up some new roles, some higher usage. So that's always going to be something to keep an eye on over the first few weeks, because that does give you an edge for people who aren't really necessarily paying all that much attention. And it's definitely something we'll be keen in here on each show. But looking at point guards tonight, obviously, you know, with guys like Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins all going, I think the majority of us are going to be looking for some dive down kind of type value, or maybe to kind of sit in the mid range and help balance things up and build around those guys. But looking at point guard here, D'Angelo Russell comes in at a pretty nice price, especially on FanDuel at 6,500. A really nice, you know, point guard 2 spot there. I like him in this matchup. Obviously, Harden shuffling over to the point guard role. You know, defense has been average at best at times for Harden, and it's being generous. His DK salary, 7,300. When I jumped on the slate and looked at DK, I noticed some guys that were priced up, you know, a little bit more than I expected to. It's been fairly soft over the last few years. But Russell, 7,300, I think it's appropriately priced. I think he's a solid play. I'm expecting him to take a big jump this season, so I do like him. I do like him more on FanDuel, 6,500. I think he rounds it out pretty well. Ish Smith's another one, 6,400, 4,700 on DK, 64 on FanDuel. So the matchup isn't really all that great. Going up against a Kyle Lowry defender, that's a little bit tough for me. There are some other guys that I do like a little bit more at better prices. 4,700 on DraftKings is a little bit easier to kind of accommodate. So I'm kind of looking in that direction, but probably not tonight. I think I'll give it another matchup before I like to deploy him. But Ish Smith is a guy who I will be looking at going forward, given the fact that Reggie Jackson is out. You know, and there's not a lot of ball handlers on that team or terrific offensive players outside of really Drummond, Tobias, who are obviously down low type guys. Jeff Teague is one of those new ones who's in a new situation, going over to Indiana, playing with Paul George, Thaddeus Young, Monta Ellis. That's going to be an interesting one. Obviously, Paul George is still that main offensive threat, but we're looking here in Teague. I mean, he had his big games every now and then. He was kind of that guy who would play 28 minutes, get you around 30 fantasy points, but never really much more. And I think that's going to be the case again here, given the fact that there is a lot of guys capable of scoring on this Indiana team. I'm curious to see what his assist numbers go coming into this season. 106 team total there. I do like that. I think Teague's an interesting guy. He's one of those ones, if you want to fire away here in the first game on a new team, I definitely don't mind that. I'm looking a little bit lower here. Ty Lawson, expected to play 30 to 40 minutes tonight, 5,100 on FanDuel, 55 on DraftKings. I actually don't mind, you know, if you're going a different direction than Westbrook, if you're using guys like Davis, if you're using guys like Cousins, if you're looking to pair one of them with the Harden, rounding out 2 point guard spots with a Lawson, Tim Frazier, D'Angelo Russell type, I really don't mind tonight. I think there's a tremendous amount of upside in that type of move. But Lawson, obviously this guy, fast, talented, can get to the hoop in a nice matchup as well. I love that game. I think you're looking at that one here. I mean, 212 team total, just a 2.5 spread. So, I mean, we're looking at a game that's going to be really DFS relevant. So, I like Lawson tonight. I think he's a reasonable value. I think he's going to be a staple in a lot of my lineups. And then we look at Tim Frazier for New Orleans. This is a guy who we've seen fill in and play very well, and with Drew Holiday out, you know, out with the personal reasons there. Frazier 5K on FanDuel, 4,800 on DraftKings. He's going to be a very popular option tonight. I think, we're looking at some pretty intriguing values here to start the night. So point guard's a spot where I don't mind paying down. Obviously, Westbrook is going to be the top option. Obviously, you're not going to be using Harden as a point guard with his multi-eligibility there. So don't be looking that route. Kemba Walker, Isaiah Thomas, Kyle Lowry, all, on tonight's slate. For me, I kind of like paying up or paying down. I think that's going to be the move I make. Just kind of how the slate works out so far. Looking at shooting guard, Devin Booker, I like here. The price wasn't as high as I expected. Obviously, this guy we saw last year, tremendous usage. We're seeing Eric Bledsoe, Brandon Knight, Devin Booker kind of backcourt role, where they're playing, those guys and I'm curious to see kind of what the usage shakes up for really Bledsoe and Booker to start the season. I do anticipate them being a lot of the scoring low guys throughout the season. 6,200, a really nice price on FanDuel. 65 mid price. He's also small forward eligible, so that is a bonus for Booker as well. Nicholas Batum, another mid-range option, 6,200 on FanDuel, 6,400 on DK. This is a guy with triple-double upside. A little bit tougher matchup against Milwaukee, but I definitely don't mind that upside. Avery Bradley, this is a guy who played pretty well in the preseason. Obviously, is a guy we've seen go off time and time again. But we've also seen the floor be rather low, just because this Boston team is a little bit frustrating in terms of DFS, especially with all the guards they have. With Marcus Smart out, Bradley's a guy who can nab a couple steals per game. He does have, 20-point upside in terms of just legitimate scoring. With a 112 total for Boston tonight, I think he's an intriguing option. You're looking at really a backcourt I think is going to be split up for most of the year. No one's going to really play over 35 minutes, but while Marcus Smart's out, you might get that a little bit. So in a matchup against the Nets, obviously that's something to kind of jump on here early in the season. Moving down here, in terms of other guys, Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, I think is going to be, people look at him and go, okay, there's some value there, but going up against that backcourt of Boston, they were tremendous defensively against guards, and they are one of the better defensive teams. The pace of play really does kind of allow them to score fantasy points against them, so I'm not against it. He's really cheap, 4,600. I don't mind him as kind of a punch shooting guard option at the second spot there. But I think he's not a must play or a must value tonight. With the matchup against Avery Bradley, obviously that is one of the tougher defensive jobs. So Jefferson's a guy who can rack up steals. We've seen that before. Not a tremendous scorer. Not going to be looked to be a really good scorer. 10 to 15 points, probably about his ceiling. I can't see anything more. So he's got to really contribute with the peripheral stats to make a difference. Aaron Aflalo, 3,900 on DK, or on FanDuel, 3,700 on DK. We're looking here, at a shooting guard for Sacramento who's probably going to play around 30 minutes. With Collison out, Lawson, Aflalo, pretty much a value in the backcourt there against a Suns, defensive team that really struggled. Pace of play is going to be high in this one, so I don't mind him as a punt option. I think he's going to be another popular play. You can look to him as well. Small forward, not a night where there's a lot of stars. Obviously, we saw LeBron, Durant, Kawhi all go off last night. We're limited here with Paul George going a little expensive for my taste. This is not an area where I'm really looking to pay up. You have guys like Rudy Gay, Danilo Gallinari, Andrew Wiggins, not all that intriguing for me. So we're going to kind of jump down here. In that Houston Lakers game, you have Trevor Ariza, Luol Deng. I look at that total, 222, with just a 7-point spread there. So I'm looking at that game for a lot of guys, including a lot of about Harden. He's going to be a big-time contributor this year, a possible MVP guy. Wouldn't be surprised to see him lead all players in fantasy points outside of really Westbrook. So, Luol Deng, obviously a guy who we can see put up 30 to 35 fantasy points. The floor is still Not something I'm more comfortable in, even in a role here with the Lakers. I don't think he's going to be a bad play. I think if he sits around these prices, he's going to be a popular value throughout the season. So he's certainly in play. Trevor Ariza in that same game. Obviously, this is a guy who was very frustrating to use last year because his usage really, it seemed better than advertised. In terms of what he put out on the court, because he was just off most games. The shooting wasn't there. He was a guy who you really had to rely on steals for. He's $1,000 more expensive than Deng on DraftKings. I like Deng more. Ariza, I do think, has a little bit more upside. Obviously, these two were one of the poor defensive teams in the league last year, so I think they're intriguing options. Outside of that, we start to kind of dive down. I mean, you got Harrison Barnes on his new Dallas team. He's a guy who I'm not really excited to use. Obviously, one of the values, 4,800 on FanDuel, 58 on DraftKings. That's a little too high for me. With the Charlotte injury situations, that's going to be something I'm going to be looking at in terms of the rotation. You have Michael Kidd-Gilchrist there, expected to start Marvin Williams. So with Frank Kaminsky, I'm curious to see what they run in terms of the 3 and the 4 and mixing, matching those types of guys. So keep an eye on that situation as the, slate rolls closer to game time and tip off. Obviously, no more late swap if you're playing on DraftKings, which is a bummer. So, we got to make our decisions early on here. Looking at power forward in the 6K range, I think it's pretty reasonable tonight. I mean, we're looking at Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins, both over 10K on both sites. Those guys are in great spots as well. And then we kind of drop down. I mean, you have an Al Horford there on DraftKings at power forward eligibility, 7K, really nice there. Gets a nice matchup against the Nets. Really curious to see how he fits in with Boston. I expect him to be a pretty good threat. You look at him and not a terrific rebounder. This is still a Boston team. Last year, they did struggle against bigs, and adding Horford really isn't going to change that. So Brook Lopez would be in play tonight as well, who we'll get to. But Horford is certainly in play. One power forward eligible. I don't mind him on FanDuel as well. Then we kind of get into Ryan Anderson, also moving over to Houston, playing the power forward spot. He's an intriguing option against the Lakers team that really struggles rebounding the ball. Ryan Anderson, I mean, when he gets hot, this is a guy who we plugged and play for a lot of Anthony Davis injuries, which has happened numerous throughout the years. Anderson's a guy who you can plug and play. I don't mind him at these mid-range prices. Obviously not quite the value that he's usually at when he's more of a bench role. So curious to see how he fits in with Houston. I think he's certainly in play. I think that once again that entire game is basically in play. Same with Julius Randle, 5,900. On DraftKings there, so about an 800 difference from Anderson. I don't mind him. Jokic for Denver. He's a guy who. We looked at the minute situation for Denver last year with the bigs, and obviously Kenneth Faried is coming off the bench now with Nurkic starting. So this is going to be an intriguing front court. I mean, obviously those guys on a fantasy points per minute basis, when they're not fouling, are tremendous DFS players. And those are two guys, I think Jokic at 6,900 on DK, 6,300 on FanDuel was basically where I went in and was like, okay, they priced up on DraftKings and priced up pretty well. I was surprised to see those guys priced up where they were. So not quite the values they were coming into the slate in comparison to some of the other names and some of the well-balanced lineups you can build. I'm certainly okay with that. Outside of that, we start to dive down. Marvin Williams is a possible option. Tyler Zeller is a guy who's banged up. Curious to see what they do. I mean, Milwaukee, obviously, they're a sizable team. Marvin Williams, Jabari Parker's not a tremendous defender. I don't mind Marvin Williams there. I think he's an intriguing option. As a secondary power forward, I think you got to look at, obviously, usage is going to be with Batum and Kemba. But the front court, does have some potential there. Milwaukee, even as big as they are in terms of length, they're just not a good rebounding team. They weren't last year. They might be a little bit better this year, but time will tell. Serge Ibaka is a guy with a big price difference from site to site. 4,800 on FanDuel, 6,200 on DK. Obviously, in Orlando, he was involved in the Oladipo trade. You look at Orlando's favorite there with over 100 team total. Going up against a Miami team that's just, really it's Hassan Whiteside and Goran Dragic right now. So, You look, I definitely don't mind using Ibaka in all formats. I do think 6,200 on DK is a little expensive for my taste. I'm going to have some shares, but probably not a ton at that price. Trevor Booker seems to have locked up the power forward job there in Boston, or not Boston, in Brooklyn, who's taking on Boston tonight. 4,800 on FanDuel, 4,200 on DK. This is a guy, double potential because Boston's rebounding was slightly below average last season. Um, obviously we've seen him be plugged in for injuries before. Brook Lopez is going to be a guy who's going to get just a ton of usage down low. We know that's going to happen. But Booker, a couple opportunities for some putbacks, a 10 and 12 game, maybe a block or a steal. Not bad there. I think there is some potential, and I think he's going to go a little bit under the radar here. So in terms of a second power forward, I really don't mind him. Looking at center, obviously we have guys like Karl-Anthony Towns, Brook Lopez, Hassan Whiteside. Brook Lopez on DraftKings 7,400 compared to 8,600 Whiteside, 9,200 Karl-Anthony Towns. Pretty big discount. He's also 1,000 cheaper than Drummond, so I'm intrigued there. I think that's, a Lopez is a way you can go. We know the upside there. We also know this Brooklyn team is a mess. They're not going to be good, but on given nights, they're going to have some value. And against Boston in their pace, in their kind of lack of defense in the front court, I'm okay with you looking at Lopez and GPPs tonight. As we kind of dive down, Miles Turner, 6,200 on DK, 64 on FanDuel. I'm looking to kind of use and try and pay up at center. Nurkic for Denver, he's another one, 4,600 on FanDuel, 5,800 on DK. So a little bit of a price difference. That's where I mentioned the fact that, DK did price up those Denver bigs a little bit tonight. So I don't mind Nurkic. I think he's an intriguing play. Obviously, I think, the lower floor becomes a little bit of a worry. I think we're going to see a decent amount of upside from these guys throughout the season, but we might have to go through some growing pains to get there. Outside of that, we're looking at center. Clint Capella is a guy who's going to have a little bit more freedom if he can stay out of foul trouble. 4,200 on FanDuel, 5,900 on DK. Once again, we see the DK bigs, priced up a little bit more. So one guy here, and I hate myself for doing this, and I hate myself that we're going to end on this note, but Roy Hibbert, 3,500 on FanDuel, 30K on DraftKings. No Frank Kaminsky. Tyler Zeller's banged up, might be limited. Hibbert could, have some double potential tonight. Milwaukee wasn't tremendous against centers last season. There is some potential. Hibbert has always had some talent and always had some block shot upside. So I'll be curious to see if he can work in here. Obviously, it's a GPP play. It's not a cash game play, but if you want to give it a look, you certainly can. That's going to wrap things up with the DFC value. Be sure to head on over to DaveMasseyCafe.com. We completely revamped our optimizer, added in a lot of new tabs, a lot of new models. If you haven't checked that out, please do. Alongside the salary exploitation, you can see the site-to-site value. We also have our DraftKings and FanDuel cheat sheets, other content as well. So be sure to head on over there. And if you like what we're doing on these podcasts, be sure to give us a subscribe as well.